All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Jay Iwasaki, and I'm at the Wake campus. I'm at the University of Adelaide with Katja Hogendorn. And today I'm going to talk about bringing trees to the bees. Exploring novel methods for improving pollination in orchards, specifically apple orchards. This project is supported by funding from the Australian Government Department of Agriculture and Water Resources as part of its Rural R&D for Profit program. And I'm presenting today from Ghana land on the Adelaide Plains. All right, so I'm sure everyone now is well aware of the importance of pollination for flowering plants. Many plants require an intermediate pollinator, and apples are among them. So apples are kind of the quintessential fruit along with bananas, and they have been cultivated for thousands of years from their origins in Central Asia. There are over 7,500 varieties, and all of them require pollination for fruit set from another distantly related cultivar or closely related species, such as crab apples. These pollen sources are known as pollinizers, not to be confused with pollinators. And of the pollinators, bees of all types are commonly found in apples, but the European honeybee are particularly important due to their ease in providing that readily available pollinator for a mass flowering crop. All right, so when it comes to pollination, there are some trends that are causing problems, especially here in Australia. One of them is hail, which is increasingly frequent and severe due to climate change and associated atmospheric instability. So as a result, hail netting is nearly a requirement for many growers, especially for apples, pears, cherries, and stone fruit. Hail nets, however, can cause issues with honeybee foraging by altering their light conditions and putting up a physical obstacle for their orientation flights, depending on how high the netting can be. All right, so going back to pollinizers, apples need another variety or cultivar for achieving fruit set. And these pollinizers must be chosen specifically for the type of apple you would like to grow. Many apples are derived from another that was very similar, and so you need something with sufficient genetic diversity in order to get that fruit set. And then you also need to match the bloom period. So some apples are early bloomers and some are late bloomers, and if you have a mismatch, you might not get the cross-pollination. So in an orchard, you would generally like to have some redundancy in the amount of pollinizers, both for the type and the general abundance, but you may not want to grow apples from that pollinizer. So you've got a trade-off with choosing a less desirable cultivar for an apple that may not be as desired in grocery stores. So in conjunction with those pollinizer issues, we also have that reduced pollination from hail netting. Reduced pollination can affect the quality of an apple as well as the yield. And we know that pollination effectiveness can drop off quite dramatically with distance from pollinizers. So there's an old diagram where you can kind of see that within a meter, you have relatively high pollination. And the other side of that tree could drop off, and then you go maybe 6 meters away and it's even worse. And you really have that proximity effect being really important in pollination. So we have a real dilemma and need to increase pollination efficiency under nets. And our novel solution is to utilize recent advances in drone technology and autonomous systems to develop a way to bring those pollinizers to the bees while they're foraging within those orchard rows. So for our pilot trials this last year, we put our pollinizers basically on a ute where we simulated being a robotic mobile pollinizer unit by systematically driving those apples down the rows. To test that feasibility, we observed whether bees were visiting them, how they utilized the pollen, and whether after they utilized that pollen, if they were actually crossing to what we wanted them to our pink lady flowers. And one interesting result from our pilot trials was found when we were observing the bee behavior. So our first design just put all the apples in the back of the ute, and as something that was kind of unforeseen, the bees weren't really using them. So bees tend to follow the nearest flower and continue down the rows. And when there was a gap between our apples and the apple rows, they didn't cross that gap. The ones that did, if they did cross, just kind of stayed in that really attractive floral display, used the resources, and then left the MPU. So no cross-pollination. So I tried to create a new setup. So I put the apples in a line fitting in the back of the ute and with gaps between the lines. And so basically the apple, the pollinizer flowers became kind of a ladder or a bridge between the rows where they would pick up that pollen that you wanted them to pick up, the Granny Smiths in this example, and transfer it over to the next row and hopefully pollinate the pink ladies. So now that we have our experimental design that seems to be something that could be effective, this year we did our field trials with larger pollinizers with a standardized MPU approach. We continued with our observational data of bee activity and sampled fruit set of the flowers visited. And then in the fall, we will conduct genetic testing of apple parentage to confirm whether or not the pollen from the pollinizers is actually the ones that are doing the fruit set, and all of this with comparison of control rows. So as a visual, here is our field site. You can see the apples on the left that are out in the open. Oh, sorry, those are cherries and some apples, but now they're all covered. And then on the right side, you can see the hail netting covering the apple rows. And the center white row is our treatment row. And the green rows, two on either side with a break are our control rows. And we drove down our MPU through one row for the entire flowering period. All right, so far so good. From our results so far, we had really good activity on our pollinizers and enough flowers for those pollinizers to have resources. We were observing whether or not the pollen was utilized and able to be utilized, and we had good visitation and weather. Our sampling methodology, so we observed the bees collecting pollen on those pollinizers, and we noted when they crossed to a pink lady and made good contact. And we tagged those flowers and removed other flowers in the cluster so we can keep track of which particular flower. And then we did the same thing with controls with other bees that were making contact with flowers. So last week, I finally had a chance to enter data and got some interesting results. Here is a figure of the percent set of our sampled flowers in our rows. So one row in particular stands out really nicely above the rest. And lo and behold, it was our treatment row. So we've got a bit of analyses yet to do, but so far it looks actually quite promising that when a bee transitions from a pollinizer, it may increase the set by potentially double. And this is of course limited by where the MPU was stopping and the flowers that were in that close proximity, which can be just a meter or two. And we still got some work to do in the fall. So when the apples are mature, what we're going to do is take their seeds and determine the parentage of the pollinizer down to the specific cultivar. Then we can compare those with the control rows and get an idea exactly how big an impact those pollinizers had. There's several other cultivars in the row, so we get a good idea of what kind of pollen movements taking place as well. All right, so almost done. So as far as the next steps go, there's still some questions to ask about how cost effectively you can implement a mobile pollinizer unit and how many pollinizers you need, how long they need to be out, et cetera. But one of the growers I was talking to is already interested in other types of autonomous driving systems. So it may not be too big of an investment on its own, but something kind of like a module for an existing system. And that's several years down the track with further study. So thank you, everybody, as well as our funders and other people involved in the project locally, Susie Green, and from our grants, Ashley Zamek, and all our growers here as well. And field assistants from Nick and Lizzie too, both who'll be giving talks later this week. And before I finish, I'll just note that I'll be also presenting a pre-recorded talk for Abby Davis following the questions. So she won't have any questions, but she's not here. And I'll just lead into that as soon as questions are over. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Jay. That was a great talk, really interesting. We've definitely got time for a couple of questions, so please raise your hands if you've got a question. John.
Yeah, sorry, I started clapping rather than raising my hand, but we'll go with raising my hand. So you've got this autonomous vehicle moving along the roads. Does it make a difference, do you think, whether the vehicle stops or can it continue moving the whole time? Or is that...
I think ideally, ideally you'd want it to be moving very slowly, like it depends on the size of the orchard, but you'd want it to cover as many rows. You'd have to do the math to see how many kilometers it have to go and how many days it would need it to be going for, but continuous would be the best. Yeah, sure.
I wonder what's the slowest speed the bees will tolerate kind of a moving plant. I mean, no one probably knows that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's true, because they don't necessarily like when being jostled around, so you've got to go slow enough that you're not being too bumpy on those orchard rows, which can be quite muddy and not great. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Anyone else with a hand up? Okay, I can't see any. I actually have one, so I'm going to jump in. So Jay, on your data slide, which I know is preliminary, it looked like your cross-pollination ones had a fruit set of about 50% or something like that. Does that, but in your method, when you saw them land on the flower, then you took the other flowers away and just kind of isolated that one. Does that mean that it may have had visits before and afterwards? Because otherwise it seems like a very high fruit set. That typically one visit by a honeybee is not very, doesn't do the job, but just wondering if I've interpreted that correctly.
Yeah, so it was it was double, so it's about 100%. But yeah, it was open, so we left them open, but we had also the MPU sitting there for about half an hour at a time, so there could have been multiple visits, and can't always keep track of where the bees are going. But also in that row, there are flowers that we couldn't tag, we couldn't see where they went, or they're too high or something. So we've got to still look at other apples in that row later when they've actually matured. But yeah, it would be the same for the control rows. So if there's an effect of the MPU, I think we've covered it with the same kind of removal of flowers and everything.